money from the American people's pockets and depositing it into their bank accounts. Now we move on to yet somebody else. This is the so-called border czar, Tom Homan. Mr. Homan is on tape accepting $50,000 in cash bribes stuffed in a brown paper bag from an undercover FBI agent. Apparently, Mr. Homan accepted these bribes in exchange for awarding federal contracts to his friends. Trump's Department of Justice killed the investigation into Mr. Homan's crime.
That was a sitting U.S. representative calling the president's border czar a bribed man. On tape, on camera, in a congressional hearing. Tom Homan's answer? I did nothing illegal. Not, I didn't take the money. Not, that's false. Just, I did nothing illegal. The DOJ had the recording. Trump's people closed the investigation anyway, and not one Republican in that room made a sound. If you want this tracked every day, hit subscribe, because now watch exactly how we got here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for calling this hearing. Since January, Donald Trump has used the full power of the federal government to attack Americans in cities across the country. In Donald Trump's America, you are at increased risk of experiencing militaristic operations in your home, increased risk of being subject to detainment by mass thugs and wannabe vigilantes, increased risk of suffering injuries due to reckless and illegal acts by rogue federal agents, increased risk of being deported to foreign nations even if you are an American citizen, and you're at an increased risk of being targeted by federal government for criticizing the president and his friends. Congressional Republicans have completely abandoned their Article I powers and have exchanged their responsibility to their constituents with fealty to the president. They have allowed the president to morph federal agencies into instruments of autocracy. And as a result, the president has been able to ignore federal law, disregard court orders, and implement the largest pay-for-play scheme in American history. The White House, well, what's left of it anyway, is literally up for sale. The federal courts have characterized this presidency as, quote, lawless. In fact, when ruling against illegal acts committed by the administration, a Republican-appointed federal judge stated, quote, the court cannot imagine how the public interest might be served by permitting federal officials to flaunt the very laws they have sworn to enforce. In a separate case where the administration was sued for unlawful acts, the judge, also a Republican appointee, stated, quote, allowing constitutional rights to be dependent upon the grace of the executive branch would be a dereliction of duty by this third and independent branch of government and would be against the public interest. But in another case, the court summed it up perfectly by declaring, quote, as is becoming far too common, we are confronted again with the efforts of the executive branch to set aside the rule of law in pursuit of its own goals. Judiciary Committee Republicans have been completely complicit in this corruption. But since they're so interested in restoring law and order, I have a couple of suggestions on where they can start. Number one, this is the President of the United States standing beside his best friend, Jeffrey Epstein. As we all know, Mr. Epstein is one of the most notorious sexual predators in American history. For 8 weeks, the Republicans on this committee have chosen to protect these two men instead of providing justice to Mr. Epstein's victims. Now the administration is panicking. First, they campaigned on releasing the Epstein files. Then AG Bondi and associates did a photo op with the files, and she said, and I quote, the Epstein list is on my desk. Then somehow the Epstein list didn't exist. Then the Epstein files became a Democratic hoax. Now the president is supposedly supportive of releasing the files, even though he's currently ignoring a congressional subpoena to do so. Now the president is simply crashing out. And it's because he can't seem to explain his special decades-long relationship with one of the most prominent sexual predators in American history. It's already public that he's in the Epstein files, but his administration is hiding the context of his involvement, if any, with Mr. Epstein's horrific crimes. Now, this is Miss Ghislaine Maxwell. Miss Maxwell, who obviously helped Jeffrey Epstein traffic more than 1,000 women and girls, well, Donald Trump is now giving her special treatment while she's serving out her prison sentence. He won't even rule out giving her a pardon or commuting her sentence. I don't need to explain why pardoning sex traffickers wouldn't be restoring law and order. Now, this is Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Not only has Secretary Noem been busy filming propaganda ads, she's also been busy cashing in on millions of taxpayer dollars. In fact, Secretary Noem has funneled millions of dollars to a company called the Strategy Group. The Strategy Group helped Secretary Noem win her campaign to become the governor of South Dakota. Corey Lewandowski, her top policy advisor, has worked with the firm. And the company's CEO is married to Secretary Noem's chief spokesperson, Mrs. Tricia McLaughlin. This is what corruption looks like. They're stealing money.
Here's the pattern. Not theory, pattern. The Epstein list was on Bondi's desk, then it didn't exist. Then it was a hoax. Now Bondi has been fired and is fighting a contempt subpoena to avoid testifying about it. Noem funneled $220 million in no-bid contracts to a firm run by her spokesperson's husband. She got caught, got fired. Trump told Reuters he never knew anything about it. Homan accepted cash in a bag from FBI undercover agents. The DOJ killed the investigation before he even took office. He still hasn't denied touching the money. 3 people. 3 scandals, 1 pattern: take the job, cash in, cover it up, and count on Republican silence in Congress to run out the clock. That pattern just got named out loud on camera. Watch what comes next.
And congressional Republicans didn't say a mumbling word. Lastly, this is insurrectionist and Nazi sympathizer Ed Martin. It appears that Mr. Martin is functioning as the Associate Deputy Attorney General, Pardon Attorney, Director of the Fake Weaponization Working Group, and Special Attorney for Mortgage Fraud. All that means is that Mr. Martin is Trump's lapdog, whom the president sends to initiate lawsuits against the president's perceived political opponents. This is what we call organized crime. They're breaking the law, often by stealing taxpayer dollars, covering up their crimes by ending and obstructing investigations, then prosecuting people who call out their unlawful behavior. And while the Republicans are encouraging this corruption, they're abandoning actual victims of violent crime and ignoring the Republican-led state's 21st century murder crisis. In September's appropriation markup, congressional Republicans proposed reducing the FBI staff by thousands of positions and underfunding the agency by more than $1 billion. They've proposed slashing resources from the ATF. They've proposed cutting grants for juvenile justice programs and hate crimes and eliminating the community violence intervention and prevention grants. They're literally defunding the police. So no matter what they say at today's hearing, congressional Republicans have proven that they are not investing in keeping American communities safe from violent crime. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. If we've learned anything this year is that congressional Republicans are more interested in serving Donald Trump than they are in serving their constituents. Over the past 10 months, they have given away permanent tax cuts to the wealthiest people on earth, demolished half of the White House, pardoned violent insurrectionists, significantly driven up cost of living across the country, and then given themselves a taxpayer-funded 8-week vacation, all so that they could delay as long as possible Congress voting to release the Epstein files. And now they're trying to gaslight you into believing that you should trust them on crime policy. They want you to believe that living in a police state is a good or normal thing. They want you to be okay with having armed soldiers and federal agents monitor you as you shop for groceries or take your children to school. They want you to think that you won't be affected, but we've already seen Americans detained, arrested, injured, and some nearly killed because of this administration's reckless approach to handling crime. And they're doing all of this without acknowledging the fact that Republican-led states are experiencing a murder and crime and violent crime crisis, and they have for the last 2 decades. The Republicans' murder state rates were 33% higher than Democratic state murder rates in both 21 and 2022. In fact, over the past 22 years, the Republican state murder rates were nearly a quarter higher compared to states that are led by Democrats. Even when you remove Democratic cities and counties from the Republican states' data, their murder rate is still nearly a quarter higher than states run by Democrats. Ms. Levine, how long have you studied crime?
You're going to have me show my age. Is that nice?
It doesn't show on your face, honey. That's all that matters.
Let's just say about 3 decades.
Okay, very good. So would you agree that factors like poverty, lax gun laws, and a lack of public services can lead to higher crime rates?
Yes, I agree with that.
According to the Census Bureau, states with the highest poverty rates are disproportionately Republican governed and often have laxer gun laws and less public services. Wouldn't you agree that these factors are likely why Republican-led states have higher murder rates than Democratic states?
I would. In fact, I would like to lift up some research from one of our faculty members, Dr. Robert Apel. He recently conducted a study looking at the relationship between levels and quality of public assistance and crime, and found that there is the relationship in the expected direction, that is, lower public assistance, more crime, more recidivism.
Thank you so much for that. So not only are you likely to be a victim of violent crime in a Republican-led state, you're now less likely to receive victim assistance because of Republicans cutting resources for food, shelter, and transportation. This is what Donald Trump's America looks like. Never let a wannabe tyrant convince you that the only way for you to be safe is to live under a police state where he controls your day-to-day activities by means of military or armed federal agents. That's what we call a dictatorship. And I just want to be clear, because I appreciate what you just brought up, because I did serve as a public defender and a court-appointed attorney. So as we sat here, I remembered that one of the witnesses' opening statements, they mentioned the word why. And as Michael Jackson used to sing, why? We have not dealt with the why. We have not dealt with why crime happens. And if you understand the why, then maybe you can come to a conclusion. But as someone who has sat there with people that were too poor to be able to afford their own attorneys, I can tell you some whys. But what I am going to do is talk to you about why the idea that incarceration is the only thing that can fix anything, and the fact that we have 2 witnesses that are telling us that we need to go back to the '94 crime bill when we learned that all that did was drive up incarceration. It didn't drive down addiction, because addiction is actually an illness, but that's a whole other issue. And you can't incarcerate your way out of an illness, just like you can't incarcerate somebody that has cancer and believe that somehow they now will be cured. But I digress. What I will tell you is that we also know that the U.S. has the highest incarceration rate of any independent democracy on earth. Worse, every single state incarcerates more people per capita than most nations. In the global context, even progressive U.S. states like New York and Massachusetts appear to be extreme, just like Louisiana and Mississippi. In addition to that, the United States has the highest incarceration rate, the highest average firearms per 100 people, highest homicides per 100,000 people, and the lowest safety and securing rate of 12 countries in comparison. I had a 17-year-old that was charged with stealing food out of the concession stand at his high school. Unfortunately, in the state of Texas, at the age of 17, you are considered an adult. So what did they do? They decided to charge him with burglary of a habitation. He had an attorney that was not me when he went through this. They put him on felony probation. Ultimately, they revoked his probation because he was too poor to show up to his actual probation officer, as his mom was the one who was required to take off work so that she could take him in. I'm gonna wrap up, but this is really important for people to understand. At the end of the day, they ended up giving my kid the maximum punishment for less than $20 worth of candy that he stole out of the concession stand. Ultimately, I told them that it was a mistake to send him to prison. When he went to prison, he learned how to be a criminal. That's where he learned how to cook meth. The next time that I saw him, it was because he had committed a real crime. Ultimately, all that did was harm our communities. And I will be clear, this was a poor young man, but he was.
They called this hearing to talk about crime. What they got instead was a 30-year criminologist confirming, on the record, that Republican-led states post higher murder rates, and that poverty, stripped public services, and loose gun laws are why. The expert didn't hedge. She confirmed it. So the party running this hearing on law and order governs the most dangerous states in the country. And the officials they're protecting, Homan, Noem, Bondi, are on record taking cash, steering contracts to friends, and burying the evidence. Noem is gone. Bondi is gone. The Epstein deposition is set for May 29th, only after Democrats threatened contempt. Homan is still running border enforcement, still hasn't denied taking the money. The video still hasn't been released. That is what this hearing exposed. Not a Democratic attack, a documented record. 3 officials, 3 corruption allegations, 0 accountability from the majority that controls every committee in Congress. The clock on that is running. Subscribe and watch how fast it moves.